So if we're thinking about the women's movement in this moment as a kind of umbrella for many movements, one place where we've seen a lot of action and a lot of women's leadership over the past decade or so has been in the labor movement. How might we think about the labor movement as a movement of women at this moment?
That's actually a terrific question, because we all know that the labor movement is in decline in general. At least that's the way we talk about it. Membership is declining in the traditional labor movement. But among the people being organized, women are probably about 2/3 of the new members of the labor movement. And at the same time, women have moved into leadership positions that they've never had before. But I think the key to that is that, of course, the sectors that are now being organized are sectors in which women predominate and in which women lead. My favorite example is the Domestic Workers Alliance, which is not a traditional union in any sense, but which functions just like one. And it, of course, originates in what we call the grassroots, in domestic workers who've been notoriously underpaid and exploited in various ways and often not eligible for some of the benefits that other workers get. And they're now organizing freelance across the country into what we call a labor union, although it's not a traditional labor union in any sense.
So what does it mean to call something alt-labor, in the example of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, for example?
Traditional labor unions organized often within industries or in particular workplaces to raise the wages of the workers working in them. What they wanted were sufficient numbers of members located in a particular place or a particular industry so that workers would have what they called bargaining power. And that bargaining power would bring them what workers needed: higher wages, shorter hours, better working conditions, whatever it was that they wanted. Alt unions are less concerned with workplace conditions or even workplace wages to some extent than they are with the general well-being of working people. So an alt-labor union would not organize its members. It wouldn't even have members. It would have affiliates probably, but it wouldn't organize them to bargain collectively. It would organize them to educate them on how to bargain for themselves, on how to use the legal system to get the benefits that they were entitled to, on how to create a collective sensibility that taught each individual what she was entitled to. So domestic workers is a great example because most domestic workers work for an individual employer who has no other employee. And the result of that, when it's private domestic work, is that each worker is on her own. But if they get involved in a worker center or an alt-union situation, that situation could teach a woman what she's worth, not just in terms of dollars and cents, but as a human being who helps to care for another family. And that sense of self-worth, self-esteem, will help her then to negotiate whatever she wants, whether it's more respect or better working conditions, whatever that might be. The nice thing about an alt union is how it, sort of creates what you might call a class sensibility. That is a sensibility that even though we have individual responsibilities to individual employers, we're all in this together. And, we have to help each other when we run into trouble. That's the big difference, I think.
And another place where we've seen a kind of union-backed but not necessarily union-based movement is in the Fight for 15.
Yes, that's one of the things that I like to talk about. Because, of course, the Fight for 15 as a movement was started by fast food workers, and though now it's spread to all kinds of industries, it's the fast food workers, 80% of whom are female and most of whom are paid minimum wage, who began that process. And intriguingly enough, when they began to organize, they raised issues that the labor movement itself, the more traditional labor movement, sort of caught up, and the labor movement then became a part of the Fight for 15 and invested money and so on in the organizing campaign. But the issues that they raised, which I found quite fascinating, are not just the issues of wages, but also the issues of benefits, of parental leave, for example, paid parental leave, because it was fast food workers, among other low-paid workers, who argued that unpaid parental leave was useless to people who weren't making enough money. So I find this completely fascinating. I could go on and talk about the fact that this also leads or links to some of the ways that organizing now happens. So the labor movement traditionally organized on the shop floor. And then as the labor movement began to decline and corporatization took over, the large labor unions, and I'm thinking here of SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, began to organize from the top down, as it were. That is, the leadership negotiated with corporations to bring benefits to workers. And that had certain advantages, but it also had many disadvantages. And the big disadvantage, of course, is that the voices of ordinary workers were stifled or not heard as loudly as they otherwise might have been heard. And that's part of what has led to the so-called alt-union movement, in which women have been among the great leaders. So the alt-union movement puts community centers or worker centers all over the place. New York has dozens of them, where workers who are not members of traditional unions can go because they have been abused at work, or they've been denied certain benefits, or their wages have not been paid as they should have been paid. And they go and they get represented and led and informed by these worker centers, which don't organize them into collective bargaining units, but which do try to organize them into community groups, community advocacy groups, I suppose you'd say. Those are women's strategies for organizing. And it's wonderful to see women not just taking the leadership of unions, but also functioning to rethink what a union movement might be.